What if I told you that a head coach just destroyed his own team's season by fabricating a medical injury to bench his most talented quarterback? That's exactly what happened in Cleveland this past Sunday, and the fallout is about to reshape the entire NFL landscape. Shedeur Sanders, the electric fifth-round phenomenon who just threw for 342 yards and 4 touchdowns against Carolina, is now actively seeking a trade after Kevin Stefanski pulled the most shocking power play in recent Browns history. This isn't just another coaching controversy, this is organizational betrayal at its most devastating level, and I've got exclusive details that will blow your mind about what really went down behind closed doors. If you've been following the Browns' endless quarterback disasters over the past 2 decades, you know this franchise has a special talent for destroying promising careers. But what happened to Shedeur Sanders this past Sunday against Philadelphia represents a new low, even by Cleveland standards. I'm talking about a calculated deception that has torn apart the locker room, infuriated ownership, and potentially cost the Browns their franchise quarterback. Multiple sources with direct knowledge of the situation have revealed the shocking truth about Stefanski's pre-game lies, and the ripple effects are already being felt across the league. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this could be the final straw that breaks Cleveland's back. Here's where this story gets absolutely insane, and I need you to understand just how unprecedented this situation really is. Multiple sources with direct access to the Browns organization have confirmed that Kevin Stefanski deliberately fabricated Shedeur Sanders' oblique injury before Sunday's game against Philadelphia. We're not talking about a precautionary measure or a coach being overly cautious with a young player's health. This was a calculated lie designed to eliminate Sanders from the equation entirely. Let me paint you the complete picture of what transpired in the hours leading up to kickoff. Sanders arrived at the stadium Sunday morning and proceeded through his normal pregame routine without any indication of physical discomfort. During warm-ups, multiple witnesses observed him throwing absolute lasers across the field, displaying the same explosive arm strength that had torn apart Carolina's defense just 1 week earlier. His mobility during scramble drills was flawless, cutting, pivoting, and accelerating with zero signs of the oblique strain that Stefanski would later claim was keeping him sidelined. But here's the most damning evidence. Team physicians conducted their standard pregame evaluation and found absolutely nothing wrong with Sanders. The training staff documented no concerns in their official reports. When pressed by medical personnel about the nature of Sanders' supposed injury, Stefanski couldn't provide specific details about when it occurred or what movements triggered the discomfort. This wasn't medical caution, this was pure fabrication. The situation became even more surreal during the broadcast itself. As the backup quarterback struggled through 3 consecutive 3-and-outs, completing barely 40% of his passes against an Eagles defense that was essentially playing prevent coverage, cameras repeatedly captured Sanders on the sideline. He was pacing with obvious frustration, occasionally throwing practice balls that demonstrated perfect mechanics and zero physical limitations. His body language screamed readiness while Stefanski maintained his charade to the broadcast crew, talking about precautionary measures and protecting a valuable asset. The breaking point came during halftime when defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz approached Stefanski about inserting Sanders into the game. With the Browns trailing and the offense looking completely inept, Schwartz made what seemed like an obvious suggestion. Stefanski's response was immediate and definitive, absolutely not. Sources describe Schwartz's reaction as visible disgust, and he returned to the defensive meeting room without another word about the quarterback situation. What makes this entire scenario so devastating is the context surrounding it. This wasn't a meaningless game in December, this was a crucial divisional matchup with playoff implications. The Browns had spent the entire week preparing for Philadelphia's aggressive defense, installing specific packages designed to maximize Sanders' dual-threat capabilities. The offensive line had worked on protection schemes tailored to his mobility. The receivers had practiced routes that complemented his arm strength and accuracy. All that preparation was thrown away because Stefanski felt threatened by Sanders' growing influence within the organization. After the Carolina performance that had everyone talking about Cleveland finally finding their franchise quarterback, Stefanski apparently decided that his authority was more important than the team's competitive success. The fabricated injury was his nuclear option, a way to reassert control regardless of the consequences. The aftermath of Sunday's deception has created the most toxic environment inside the Browns facility that anyone can remember, and I'm hearing details that will shock you about how quickly this situation has deteriorated. What should have been a celebration after a solid defensive performance against Philadelphia instead became a powder keg of frustration, confusion, and outright anger among players who recognized exactly what had transpired. The first signs of trouble emerged immediately after the final whistle. While players publicly praised the defense for holding the Eagles' explosive offense in check, and that performance was legitimately exceptional, private conversations revealed a completely different story. Offensive linemen cornered their position coaches, demanding explanations for why Sanders never entered the game despite the obvious struggles at quarterback. These weren't casual questions. Sources describe heated exchanges where veteran players questioned the coaching staff's integrity directly. The wide receivers were equally furious, and for good reason. They had spent the entire week working on timing routes with Sanders, perfecting the chemistry that had been so evident during the Carolina game. Amari Cooper, in particular, had developed an almost telepathic connection with the young quarterback, and watching that offensive potential wasted while the backup struggled with basic concepts was infuriating. Multiple receivers approached the offensive coordinator, asking pointed questions about play-calling limitations and why the game plan had been completely abandoned. But the most telling moment came during the post-game media obligations. While coaches and players went through the motions of praising team effort and defensive execution, everyone in that room knew something was fundamentally wrong. The energy felt manufactured, uncomfortable, and hollow. Veterans who had been energized by Sanders' emergence just 1 week earlier now looked defeated and confused. The situation exploded during an emergency players-only meeting that was convened immediately after media responsibilities concluded. 3 separate sources have confirmed that this meeting featured some of the most heated exchanges anyone could remember in a Browns locker room. Team captains led discussions about coaching credibility, organizational direction, and the treatment of Sanders that became increasingly confrontational as players realized the extent of Stefanski's deception. Myles Garrett, the defensive cornerstone and unquestioned team leader, reportedly addressed the squad with unusual bluntness. His message was clear: the organization was failing its players through preventable controversy and manufactured drama. Nick Chubb, returning from his own injury and understanding the importance of medical transparency, expressed disbelief that a coach would fabricate health concerns for competitive advantage. The unity that had been carefully constructed throughout the season, the sense that this Browns team was different, more professional, more committed to winning, evaporated in a single evening. Players began choosing sides, with the majority supporting Sanders while questioning Stefanski's motives and integrity. The coaching staff found themselves defending an indefensible position, trying to maintain authority while everyone knew they had been caught in an obvious lie. Perhaps most damaging of all, several veteran players privately began expressing support for Sanders' potential departure. They understood his frustration, recognized the organizational dysfunction, and couldn't blame him for exploring options with teams that would actually utilize his talents and treat him with professional respect. Now here's where this story takes a fascinating turn that could reshape the entire AFC landscape, and the financial implications are absolutely staggering when you break down the numbers. Sources within Sanders' representation have confirmed that exploratory conversations with the New York Jets began Sunday evening, just hours after the fabricated injury debacle in Cleveland. This isn't just agent posturing or leverage tactics, this is serious business with real momentum behind it. The timing couldn't be more perfect for New York. Aaron Rodgers' injury situation has created an immediate quarterback necessity that goes beyond just this season. Jets ownership is desperate to avoid another lost year, especially after the massive investments they've made in building a competitive roster. Sanders represents the perfect solution: young, electric, marketable, and uniquely capable of managing the New York spotlight given his lifetime of media preparation as Deion Sanders' son. The initial discussions have reportedly involved a multi-year arrangement that would guarantee Sanders the starting position from day one. More importantly, the Jets are promising complete offensive system installation around Sanders' strengths, the exact opposite of what he's experiencing in Cleveland, where Stefanski seems determined to minimize his impact. We're talking about tempo-based packages, design rollouts, and aggressive downfield concepts that would maximize his dual-threat capabilities. But let's talk about the financial package, because this is where Cleveland's situation becomes truly hopeless. The Jets possess the salary cap flexibility that the Browns simply don't have thanks to Deshaun Watson's albatross contract consuming massive cap space. New York can offer Sanders a deal that dwarfs anything Cleveland could propose, even if they wanted to, which seems increasingly unlikely given the organizational dysfunction. The economics of this situation favor New York significantly in multiple ways. Sanders is currently on a fifth-round rookie contract, representing incredible value for any team that acquires him. His departure would create a massive void in Cleveland that would require either an expensive veteran acquisition or another draft investment, resources the Browns don't have given their cap constraints and limited draft capital. Meanwhile, the Jets possess everything Cleveland lacks: financial flexibility, organizational stability, and most importantly, coaching alignment. Imagine Sanders throwing to Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams, handing off to Breece Hall, and operating behind an improving offensive line. The AFC East suddenly becomes competitive again, the Jets become relevant in prime time, and Sanders gets the platform his talents deserve. The broader market implications are equally significant. Sources indicate that Sanders' representation is fielding inquiries from multiple organizations beyond New York. Dallas has expressed interest given Dak Prescott's injury concerns. Miami is evaluating backup options behind Tua Tagovailoa. Seattle is considering their future beyond Geno Smith. The market for young, talented, proven quarterbacks remains robust, and Sanders checks every box. Cleveland's leverage in any potential trade scenario is essentially non-existent. They've publicly humiliated their quarterback, created locker room division, and demonstrated organizational incompetence on national television. Other teams recognize this desperation and will structure offers accordingly, knowing the Browns have no choice but to accept whatever they can get. To truly understand the magnitude of this disaster, you need to grasp Cleveland's absolutely horrific track record with quarterback development and how the Sanders situation represents the most egregious example of organizational malpractice in franchise history. We're talking about a graveyard of careers that spans over 2 decades, filled with talented prospects who arrived with hope and departed broken, bitter, and blamed for failures that were never really their fault. Let's walk through this hall of shame, because the pattern is undeniable and devastating. Tim Couch, the number 1 overall pick in 1999, showed genuine promise before being destroyed by an offensive line that couldn't protect him and a coaching staff that couldn't develop him. Brady Quinn, a Notre Dame Golden Boy with all the tools, was mismanaged into irrelevance. Brandon Weeden, despite being older, had the arm strength to succeed but was thrown into impossible situations without proper support systems. The Baker Mayfield saga is particularly relevant here because it mirrors what's happening with Sanders in terrifying ways. Mayfield arrived with swagger, confidence, and undeniable talent. He broke rookie records, energized the fan base, and seemed to represent the franchise quarterback Cleveland had been seeking for decades. But organizational dysfunction, coaching instability, and front office incompetence gradually eroded his confidence and effectiveness until he became another cautionary tale. Johnny Manziel's story is different but equally instructive. While his personal issues were significant, the Browns' complete inability to provide structure, support, or professional development accelerated his downfall. The organization failed him as much as he failed himself, creating an environment where success was virtually impossible regardless of talent level. What makes the Sanders situation so particularly infuriating is that the Browns seem to have learned from these past failures. They invested heavily in building a competitive roster around their quarterback position. The defense is elite, the offensive line is experienced, and the skill position players are explosive. They created the infrastructure necessary for quarterback success, something they had never done consistently in previous decades. But Stefanski's fabricated injury reveals that the fundamental organizational philosophy hasn't changed at all. The same insecurity, the same need to control rather than collaborate, the same willingness to sacrifice competitive advantage for coaching authority, it's all still there, just wearing different packaging. The Browns are still the Browns, no matter how much money they spend or how many personnel changes they make. The most damning aspect of this entire situation is the timing. Sanders isn't some unproven rookie struggling with the transition to professional football. He's demonstrated clear competence, obvious potential, and remarkable poise under pressure. The Carolina performance was a masterpiece of quarterback play that had national analysts proclaiming Cleveland had finally found their franchise quarterback. Then Stefanski fabricated an injury to bench him during a winnable game. This represents organizational malpractice at the highest level. Professional football teams cannot function when coaches prioritize personal authority over competitive success, when trust between players and staff is deliberately destroyed, and when talented players are systematically undermined despite their performance. The Sanders situation isn't just another Browns quarterback controversy, it's evidence of institutional dysfunction that may be impossible to overcome. The immediate ramifications of this disaster are already cascading through the organization in ways that will define the Browns' trajectory for years to come, and Thursday night's game against Pittsburgh is going to be an absolute bloodbath that exposes every weakness Stefanski's deception has created. We're talking about a perfect storm of circumstances that could result in one of the most embarrassing performances in recent Browns history. Let's start with the obvious competitive disadvantage. The Browns are facing the Pittsburgh Steelers on Thursday Night Football, a division rivalry with playoff implications being broadcast to a national audience. Pittsburgh's defense is an elite unit that specializes in exotic pressures, aggressive coverage schemes, and creating chaos for opposing quarterbacks. They've had extra time to prepare, they're playing at home, and they're facing a Browns offense that's now completely compromised. The backup quarterback situation is genuinely dire. While I won't name specific players to avoid unnecessary criticism, the reality is that Cleveland's depth at the position was never designed to handle extended playing time against elite competition. The offensive system was specifically tailored to Sanders' dual-threat capabilities, his mobility, and his arm strength. Asking a backup to execute those same concepts against Pittsburgh's defense is like asking someone to perform surgery with a butter knife. But the competitive disadvantage goes far beyond just the quarterback position. The offensive line spent weeks developing protection schemes designed around Sanders' mobility and pocket presence. The receivers worked on timing routes that complemented his arm strength and accuracy. The running game was structured to benefit from defenses respecting Sanders' scrambling ability. All of that preparation is now worthless, and there's no time to install completely new concepts before Thursday night. The locker room dynamics make everything exponentially worse. Players are choosing sides, questioning coaching decisions, and dealing with the distraction of constant media speculation about Sanders' future. Veterans who should be focused on game preparation are instead wondering whether their season is already over. Young players are questioning whether they can trust their coaches to make decisions based on competitive merit rather than personal politics. The coaching staff's credibility is in complete shambles. How do you motivate players to execute your game plan when everyone knows you fabricated an injury to bench your most talented quarterback? How do you maintain authority when your own defensive coordinator publicly disagreed with your decisions? How do you prepare for a crucial division game when half the locker room is questioning your integrity? The media circus surrounding this situation has reached fever pitch levels. National reporters are descending on Cleveland looking for exclusive details about the Sanders situation. Local beat writers are cultivating sources within the organization. Social media is exploding with speculation, analysis, and criticism. The players and coaches will be dealing with constant questions about quarterback decisions, trade rumors, and organizational dysfunction instead of focusing on Pittsburgh's defensive schemes. Perhaps most devastating of all, this game represents a potential point of no return for the entire season. A loss to Pittsburgh, especially an ugly loss that exposes the offensive limitations created by Stefanski's deception, could trigger a complete organizational meltdown. We're talking about potential coaching changes, front office upheaval, and the acceleration of Sanders' departure timeline. The Shedeur Sanders situation represents everything wrong with the Cleveland Browns organization, and it's a perfect example of how coaching ego can destroy competitive opportunity in professional sports. What started as a promising season behind an emerging quarterback talent has devolved into fabricated injuries, trade demands, and organizational collapse, all because Kevin Stefanski couldn't handle Sanders' growing influence within the team. The Jets are positioning themselves perfectly to capitalize on Cleveland's dysfunction, offering Sanders the organizational support, coaching alignment, and financial package he deserves. Meanwhile, the Browns are returning to their natural habitat: quarterback purgatory, coaching controversy, and fan base misery. This story is far from over, and I'll be tracking every development as it unfolds. The Thursday night game against Pittsburgh could be the final nail in the coffin for both Stefanski's credibility and Sanders' Browns career. What do you think about Stefanski's decision to fabricate Sanders' injury? Was this a desperate power play or justified coaching authority? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one and respond to as many as I can. If you want to stay updated on all the latest NFL drama and insider information, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the Browns' dysfunction, check out my video on the top quarterback controversies that destroyed NFL seasons. It's linked on screen now.